It's August 14th. Everybody, welcome back to the channel, and today we're diving into something that's been happening quietly along Iran's coastline while everyone's been distracted by the headlines out of the strait itself. Somewhere along the southern coast of Iran, a cave that has been hiding a fleet of speedboats for 40 years just got a visit it didn't expect. No warning. No negotiation, just precision munitions arriving out of the dark and turning a hidden naval weapon into a smoking hole in a hillside. And within hours, Iranian state media went quiet on the details, because what got hit wasn't just a boat shed, it was the backbone of the exact strategy Iran built its entire navy around for half a century. This is the story of how the United States military just took a sledgehammer to the one card Iran thought nobody could touch, and why that card just got a lot less useful. For decades, Iran didn't even bother trying to build a navy that could go toe-to-toe with the United States. That was never the plan. Instead, they built something sneakier. Thousands of small, fast, armed speedboats tucked into sea caves and camouflaged coastal pens up and down the Persian Gulf and Strait of Hormuz. The idea was simple. You don't need battleships if you can flood a narrow choke point with hundreds of tiny boats that can swarm, strike, and vanish before anyone can respond. It's the naval version of a beehive. You don't fight the swarm ship to ship. You just get stung from 15 directions at once. And for a long time, that strategy worked exactly the way it was designed to. It kept larger navies cautious. It made insurers panic. It turned one of the most important oil choke points on the planet into a place where nobody wanted to linger. So this is what you need to know. In the last few days, that entire hiding strategy has taken a direct hit, and it's worth understanding exactly what got hit, why it matters, and what Iran is going to try to do next. Because this isn't just another airstrike story. This is a story about a weapon system finally getting hunted at its source. Before we get into the details, if you're new here, stick around. Because we're going to walk through the target list, the actual capability Iran is losing, the economic bleeding this is causing them in real time, the diplomatic games being played on the side, and where this whole thing is likely headed next. Hit that subscribe button if you want to keep up with this as it develops day by day. Drop a like if this kind of breakdown is useful to you. And let me know in the comments what you think Iran's next move is going to be, because I read every single one of them. Let's start with where these hideouts actually are, because this is the part most people don't understand. Iran didn't just park a few boats somewhere and call it a strategy. They built what analysts have started calling underground missile cities. Qeshm Island, sitting right at the mouth of the Strait of Hormuz, is the biggest example. It's roughly 1,400 square kilometers of Iranian territory that experts now describe as an unsinkable aircraft carrier. And beneath its surface is a maze of tunnels and hardened bases believed to house missiles, fast attack boats, and coastal defense systems, all built specifically so they could shut the strait down whenever Tehran decided it was time. This wasn't improvised. This was engineered over years, with the specific goal of hiding Iran's most disruptive naval weapon from exactly the kind of overhead surveillance that the United States has been flying nonstop for months. Think about the scale of that project for a second. You're not talking about a few sandbags and a tarp. You're talking about hardened tunnels bored into rock, ventilation systems, hidden boat launches that can slide a speedboat into open water in seconds, and enough camouflage discipline to keep all of it invisible to satellites for years at a time. And that's exactly why the recent wave of strikes matters so much. United States Central Command has been running coordinated operations against Iranian command centers, air defense systems, missile and drone storage sites, and coastal surveillance facilities across multiple locations, including Bandar Abbas, Iran's largest port and home to major naval facilities overlooking the strait itself. In one of the more aggressive waves, American forces spent 90 straight minutes hitting coastal defense systems and cruise missile storage and launch sites specifically on Greater Tunb Island, a location Iran has used to project exactly the kind of denial capability that keeps commercial shipping terrified of moving through the strait. CENTCOM's own statement on that operation said the strikes were designed to further degrade Iran's ability to threaten innocent mariners crewing commercial vessels transiting the Strait of Hormuz. That's not vague language. That's a direct targeting of the infrastructure behind the hideouts themselves. And it wasn't just Greater Tunb. On the same broader campaign, explosions were reported across nearly the entire southern Iranian coastline in a single stretch. Bandar Abbas, Hangam Island, Bampur, and even Chabahar, although Iranian officials denied that last one specifically, which, if you've been watching this conflict for any length of time, you already know is basically their default setting. Deny first, explain never. Additional explosions hit the port city of Bandar Imam Khomeini, and reports even mentioned 3 projectiles striking a mineral water plant in Deloran, which, honestly, if your war effort is accidentally shelling a bottled water factory, you might want to reconsider your targeting priorities. Air defense systems near Iran's Bushehr nuclear power plant reportedly activated in response, which tells you Tehran genuinely didn't know where the next hit was coming from. And that uncertainty right there is the entire point to this campaign. You're not just destroying hardware, You're destroying Iran's ability to predict anything. Now here's the part that should actually make you sit up. Earlier in this campaign, back in March, the United States Air Force ran a massive bombing operation on Karg Island, a critical oil export hub sitting off Iran's Persian Gulf coast. CENTCOM described it as a large-scale precision strike that hit more than 90 separate Iranian military sites in one operation, and specifically destroyed naval mine storage facilities and missile storage bunkers while deliberately avoiding the oil and gas infrastructure itself. That distinction matters more than people realize. The United States could have crippled Iran's oil economy outright in a single strike. Instead, the target list was surgically built around the military assets only, leaving the tankers and terminals standing, which tells you this entire campaign is designed around a very specific kind of pressure, not blind destruction. Iran claimed more than 15 explosions were heard on the island in under 2 hours of continuous strikes. 90 military sites, in one night, on one island. That's not a warning shot. That's a demolition. So let's talk about what's actually inside these hideouts, because the boats themselves are more interesting than people give them credit for. Iran's so-called mosquito fleet is estimated at somewhere close to 2,000 fast attack craft, built to swarm in formations that overwhelm a single target from multiple directions at once. These aren't fishing boats with a machine gun bolted on. Some of them, like the newly unveiled Haydar 110, have reportedly hit speeds over 110 knots, which is faster than most helicopters fly at low altitude. They're armed with heavy machine guns, rocket launchers, radar-guided anti-ship missiles capable of putting a hole in a 1,500-ton vessel, and in some configurations, shoulder-fired missiles and explosive charges rigged for suicide-style attacks. And then there's the newer twist, unmanned surface vehicles, essentially remote-controlled explosive boats disguised as ordinary wooden fishing vessels, using radio remote control, line-of-sight guidance, and frequency-hopping encrypted communication links back to shore operators. One defense expert described the challenge bluntly, saying that when there are 50 of these boats disguised among normal fishing traffic along a shoreline, it becomes nearly impossible to identify all of them in time. That's the entire genius and the entire nightmare of this strategy in one sentence. You're essentially asking a naval patrol to distinguish a grandfather going out to catch dinner from a floating bomb built to look exactly like him. And it isn't just boats. Iran has also leaned on a fleet of Ghadir-class mini-submarines, roughly 120 tons each, about 29 meters long, crewed by around 7 people, carrying 2 torpedo tubes, and built off a North Korean design specifically to sit dead still in noisy, shallow coastal water and simply wait. Iran reportedly had north of 20 of these submarines before the war escalated, and even conservative American estimates suggest a significant chunk of that fleet has already been taken out, somewhere in the range of 11 confirmed. But a handful surviving is still a real problem because these things don't need to win a fight. They just need to exist as a threat that forces every single tanker captain to hesitate before entering the strait. And hesitation is exactly what turns a functioning oil choke point into a parking lot. The strategic logic behind them is almost elegant in how cheap and effective it is. A submarine that costs a fraction of what a destroyer costs can still hold an entire shipping lane hostage just by existing somewhere unknown. Here's the honesty check, because Iranian state media and a few corners of international commentary have tried to spin this entire situation as Iran holding firm, as the mosquito fleet's still fully operational, radar evading, and ready to disrupt anyone who tries to move through. And sure, some of that hardware clearly survived the initial waves of strikes. Nobody's claiming 100% destruction here, but watch what's actually happening instead of what's being claimed. If the mosquito fleet were truly untouched and fully combat ready the way certain Iranian-aligned outlets keep insisting, you would not be watching the United States systematically work through every single island, port, and coastal radar site along that coastline one at a time, week after week, in 90-minute precision waves. You destroy hidden capability like this when you're confident you know roughly where it lives. And the fact that CENTCOM keeps going back to Qeshm, back to Greater Tunb, back to Bandar Abbas, tells you these hideouts are not some mythical, untouchable network. They're a known target list, and it's being worked through methodically, wave after wave, night after night. Let's talk about the blockade itself for a second, because this is where the coastal hideout story connects directly to Iran's economy. And honestly, this is the part that should worry Tehran the most. The United States has maintained a naval blockade on Iranian ports since mid-April, specifically to block vessels entering and leaving Iranian ports, following the collapse of earlier ceasefire talks. According to CENTCOM's own figures, 85 vessels have been intercepted under that blockade, 3 ships fully seized, and the Pentagon estimates this is costing Iran something in the neighborhood of $500 million a day. $500 million every single day, just bleeding out. Some analysts using Lloyd's List data suggest a small number of vessels, somewhere around 26, have managed to slip past the blockade using alternate routing, But that's a rounding error against 85 confirmed intercepts and 3 outright seizures. And just this week, a U.S. Navy helicopter fired directly on a Panama-flagged vessel that attempted to bypass the blockade near Iranian waters, which tells you Washington isn't bluffing about enforcement. That's not a warning shot into open water. That's a helicopter engaging a ship trying to run the line. Iran, in retaliation, has reportedly seized at least 2 cargo ships of its own, which tells you this blockade fight is now a two-way street. But the scale simply doesn't compare. 85 interceptions against 2 retaliatory seizures is not a contest. It's a mismatch. Now here's where it gets genuinely strange, because at the exact same time the United States is grinding down Iran's coastal military infrastructure and choking their ports economically, Iran is trying to sell the world a completely different story through diplomatic backchannels. Tehran has been telling anyone who will listen that it's close to finalizing a legal traffic arrangement with Oman, essentially a new shipping corridor through the strait that Iran once recognized as an official legal mechanism. On the surface, that sounds like progress. Underneath it, it's the exact same play Iran has run for decades. Create just enough of a legal-looking framework that segments of the international community, particularly parts of corporate media, and a few European partners with financial exposure to shipping insurance, start treating Iran like the reasonable party in the room. Meanwhile, Iran's own Supreme National Security Council has publicly stated the strait will not reopen until the United States, in their words, corrects its behavior, which apparently means ending what they call the war on Iran and paying compensation for war damage, among a list of other conditions that read less like a negotiating position and more like a fantasy wish list. You don't get to firebomb tankers, kill foreign crew members, and then submit an invoice for damages. That's not how any of this works, and Washington clearly isn't entertaining it either. And speaking of foreign crew members, this is a detail that deserves more attention than it usually gets. Since this crisis escalated, Iran has been directly responsible for a string of attacks on commercial vessels that had absolutely nothing to do with military targets. A Norwegian-owned chemical tanker hit by a projectile northeast of Kalhat. A Cyprus-flagged container ship struck so badly its crew, including 11 Indian nationals, had to abandon ship into a lifeboat. One of those sailors, a man from Pune, India, was later confirmed dead after his body was recovered by the Omani Navy weeks after the attack. A Marshall Islands flagged tanker hit by an unmanned surface vehicle roughly 50 nautical miles off Muscat, killing a crew member and setting the engine room on fire. A Honduras-flagged bitumen ship attacked and damaged in the same general window. These aren't combatants. These are merchant sailors doing a job caught in the middle of a choke point Iran has turned into a minefield, both literally and figuratively, to make a geopolitical point. Iran has reportedly killed as many as 17 mariners in these kinds of incidents through this entire crisis. Ordinary people who signed up to move cargo, not to become casualties in someone else's power struggle. And every single time one of these attacks happens, Iran's foreign ministry pivots the conversation back to how reopening the strait depends on American compensation for violations. Iran claims happened first. It's an impressive amount of gaslighting for a government whose own naval forces are the ones pulling triggers. Now, let's zoom into the actual mechanics of how the United States is systematically dismantling this hideout network, because the target selection tells its own story. It's not random. CENTCOM strikes have consistently focused on 3 categories: coastal surveillance sites, which are the radar and sensor networks that let Iran actually spot approaching ships and coordinate swarm attacks in the first place; missile and drone storage and launch facilities, which is the ammunition behind the threat; and command and control infrastructure, which is the actual nervous system that turns a scattered fleet of speedboats into a coordinated swarm instead of just a bunch of guys with machine guns driving in circles. Take away the radar and the swarm goes blind. Take away the command centers and the swarm goes deaf. Take away the storage bunkers and eventually the swarm runs out of anything worth shooting. That's the actual strategy playing out here, piece by piece, island by island. And it's why this current wave of strikes against the coastal hideouts specifically is so much more significant than another routine exchange of fire. It's also worth understanding just how exposed Iran's economic lifeline has become because of all this. Roughly 90% of Iran's oil export revenue historically ran through just 3 berths on Karg Island. Recent reporting suggests those berths have sat empty for stretches between 10 and 22 days at a time, which for an oil exporting economy is close to catastrophic. Empty berths for that long-risk actual equipment seizing up, meaning even once this conflict eventually cools down, Iran may not simply be able to flip a switch and resume normal export volumes. The damage isn't just military anymore. It's structural. And that's on top of a currency that has essentially collapsed under sustained sanctions pressure and blockade enforcement, with Iran's economy showing signs of the kind of full panic mode you'd expect from a regime watching its main revenue source dry up in real time, while its hidden military assets get hunted down one cave at a time. Analysts tracking Iran's blockade losses put the Defense Department's own estimate at close to $4.8 billion in lost oil revenue in just the first several weeks of enforcement, and that number has only kept climbing since. Let's shift for a second and talk about what's happening around the edges of this story, because none of this is contained to just Iran's coastline. Jordan intercepted 8 Iranian missiles over its own airspace during one of the retaliatory waves Iran launched after the coastal strikes, which tells you Tehran is willing to widen this conflict into neighboring countries rather than absorb the losses quietly. Kuwait and Bahrain both reported coming under attack around the same period, with multiple explosions and air defenses activating in Kuwait specifically. And in one of the more sobering incidents of this entire war, an Iranian one-way attack drone managed to strike a makeshift tactical operations center in Port Shuaiba, Kuwait, an industrial port site that American logistical units had relocated to from a larger, more heavily defended base. Air defense systems failed to intercept that particular drone, and warning sirens reportedly never activated before it hit the main office trailer directly. 6 United States Army Reserve soldiers were killed in that strike, the first American combat casualties of this entire war, with more than 30 additional personnel injured. An internal memo obtained by American media afterward suggested Iranian intelligence may have actually tracked the movement of U.S. personnel to that specific site before the war even began, which, if accurate, is a genuinely disturbing level of pre-positioned surveillance on Iran's part. It's a sobering reminder that even as the coastal hideout network gets systematically dismantled, Iran still retains enough reach through drones and proxy positioning to inflict real, painful losses when the opportunity presents itself. So, when you put all of that together, you start to see the fuller picture of why hitting the coastal hideouts specifically matters so much right now. Iran's entire post-war strategy, if you can even call it a strategy at this point, depends on 3 things staying intact. The mosquito fleet needs to remain a credible threat, so the strait stays effectively closed to normal commercial traffic. The mini-submarine fleet needs enough survivors left to keep the possibility of a hidden ambush alive in everyone's mind. And the coastal command and surveillance network needs to keep functioning well enough to actually coordinate a swarm attack when the moment comes. Strip away any one of those 3 legs, and the whole stool gets wobbly. Strip away 2, and it falls over completely. And based on the pattern of strikes over the last several weeks, hitting Qeshm, hitting Greater Tunb, hitting Bandar Abbas, hitting Karg Island's mine storage bunker specifically, the United States isn't going after just one leg. It's going after all 3 simultaneously, on a rolling schedule night after night, wave after wave. Now let's dig into the actual strategic thinking here, because this is where it gets genuinely interesting if you step back far enough. Iran built this hideout network under one core assumption, that hiding a weapon underground or in a sea cave makes it functionally invisible to conventional surveillance, and that even if you know it's there, taking it out means risking exactly the kind of civilian casualties or environmental catastrophe, especially around oil infrastructure, that would turn global opinion against you. That assumption held up reasonably well for decades, largely because nobody had the appetite to actually test it. What's happened in the last several months completely inverts that assumption. Precision munitions paired with sustained overhead intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance means the old hiding strategy doesn't provide nearly the protection it used to. You can build a tunnel network under an island, sure, but if satellite imagery combined with electro-optical sensors and behavioral analytics can map the pattern of boats moving in and out of that tunnel over months of observation, eventually the hiding spot becomes a target list instead of a sanctuary. And that appears to be exactly what's happening here. The strikes on Greater Tunb weren't a guess. 90 minutes of sustained, coordinated targeting against a specific category of infrastructure, coastal defense systems and cruise missile sites, tells you the target package was built well in advance, off real intelligence, not off a hunch. Here's something else worth sitting with. Every time Iran loses one of these hideout sites, the actual replacement cost isn't just financial, it's temporal. You cannot dig a new hardened tunnel network into an island overnight. You cannot rebuild a coastal radar site in a week. These are infrastructure projects that historically took years to construct the first time around, under conditions where nobody was actively hunting them. Rebuilding them now, under sustained surveillance, with active strikes happening on a rolling basis, is an entirely different problem. Which means every hideout that gets hit isn't just a one-time loss, it's a loss that compounds. Because Iran's ability to quietly reconstruct that capability in the current environment is close to 0. That's the real damage here. It's not just what got destroyed, it's what can't realistically be rebuilt while this pressure campaign continues. And this connects directly back to the leadership chaos that's been playing out inside Iran's own command structure. When your coastal defense network, the very system meant to protect your naval hideouts, keeps getting picked apart wave after wave, and your top naval commanders keep getting reshuffled and replaced in the middle of an active war, you end up with an organization that's simultaneously trying to rebuild its physical infrastructure and its command chain at the same time under fire. with no breathing room to do either properly. That's not a resilient military posture. That's an organization in survival mode, making decisions reactively instead of strategically, which is exactly the kind of environment where mistakes compound and further losses become more likely, not less. And when the people running your naval branch are new to their posts, still learning where the levers are, while the infrastructure underneath them is actively being erased island by island, you get exactly the kind of chaotic, reactive defense posture that plays right into the hands of whoever's running the systematic targeting campaign against you. There's also a psychological dimension to all of this that doesn't get talked about enough. Every single strike on these hideouts isn't just removing hardware, it's removing certainty from every Iranian commander who has to decide whether to actually deploy what's left of the fleet. If you're an IRGC naval officer sitting on a handful of surviving speedboats and a couple of Ghadir-class submarines, and you've just watched island after island get hit in coordinated 90-minute waves, would you actually risk surfacing that submarine or sending that boat swarm out into open water, knowing there's a very real chance the exact coordinates of your hideout are already sitting on someone's target list? That hesitation, multiplied across an entire naval command structure that's already been reshuffled and is still finding its footing, is worth more strategically than any single strike. You don't need to destroy every boat to neutralize the fleet. You just need to make every remaining commander too scared to use what's left. Let's talk about where this actually goes from here, because that's the question everyone actually wants answered. Iran's realistic options at this point are limited, and none of them are particularly good. Option 1, they continue leaning on the surviving fragments of the Mosquito fleet and the mini-submarine force to conduct sporadic, harassment-style attacks on commercial shipping, hoping that even a reduced threat is enough to keep insurance premiums high and traffic suppressed, which does still cause economic pain to global shipping, even if it's a shadow of what the fleet could do at full strength. Option 2, they continue pushing this parallel diplomatic track with Oman, trying to manufacture a legal-sounding framework that lets them claim the moral high ground internationally, while quietly hoping economic desperation forces some kind of concession from Washington before their oil export infrastructure suffers permanent damage. And option 3, which honestly looks increasingly likely given the pattern of retaliatory strikes on Kuwait, Bahrain, and Jordan, they widen the conflict regionally, hoping that spreading the pressure across multiple fronts forces the United States and its regional partners to divert resources and attention away from the systematic dismantling of Iran's coastal hideout network specifically. None of these options actually solve Iran's core problem, though, which is that the fundamental strategy their navy was built around, hide, wait, swarm, is being methodically countered at the source. You can't out-hide an adversary that has persistent overhead surveillance running 24 hours a day, has apparently mapped your tunnel and cave network well enough to strike it in coordinated 90-minute waves, and is simultaneously bleeding your economy dry through a blockade that's confirmed to be costing you roughly $500 million daily. That's not a sustainable position, no matter how many 6-star military appointments you announce, or how many legal frameworks you try to sign with Oman. What's genuinely fascinating, and slightly darkly funny if you step back far enough, is how transparent the disconnect has become between what Iranian state media claims and what's actually visible on the ground. You have outlets describing the Mosquito fleet as fully operational and radar evading, ready to turn the strait into what they've called a graveyard for anyone who tries to pass. At the exact same time, CENTCOM is releasing statement after statement describing coordinated strikes against the very infrastructure that fleet depends on to function. Both of those narratives cannot be equally true. Either the fleet is genuinely still a credible coordinated threat, or it's a fleet of surviving boats with no radar coverage, no command coordination, and shrinking storage of missiles and mines to actually arm themselves with. Based on the pattern and frequency of the strikes, the second version looks a whole lot closer to reality than the first. So here's the bigger picture, the actual 40,000-foot view of what's unfolding along that coastline. For decades, Iran's entire naval doctrine rested on a simple bet, that asymmetric hidden warfare beats conventional strength in a narrow choke point, and that nobody would have the patience or the intelligence capability to actually go hunting for the hideouts one by one. That bet is now being tested in real time, and so far, it's not holding up. Every island hit, every coastal radar site destroyed, every command bunker taken out chips away, not just at Iran's physical military capability, but at the entire strategic logic the Mosquito fleet was built around in the first place. A hidden weapon that keeps getting found isn't a hidden weapon anymore. It's just a target with extra steps. And that leaves Iran in a genuinely difficult spot, trying to project strength through state media announcements and diplomatic maneuvering with Oman, while behind the scenes the actual physical infrastructure that gave those threats teeth keeps getting systematically dismantled, port by port, island by island, cave by cave. The economic bleeding continues at roughly $500 million a day. The oil export berths sit empty for weeks at a time. And the coastal hideouts that were supposed to be Iran's ace in the hole are turning into one of the most expensive strategic miscalculations in the entire conflict. When you spend 40 years building an invisible navy, and then watch it get found, mapped, and taken apart, one cave at a time in a matter of months, that's not a temporary setback. That's a doctrine failing in real time, in front of the entire world. So that's where things stand right now. A network built over decades to hide Iran's most disruptive naval weapon, getting hunted down methodically, while the country's economy hemorrhages, money it doesn't have, and its diplomatic messaging tries to paper over losses it can't actually hide from satellite imagery. What happens next depends heavily on whether Iran doubles down on the surviving fragments of that fleet, keeps chasing this legal framework play with Oman, or decides widening the conflict regionally is worth the risk. I'd genuinely love to know what you think happens next. So drop your thoughts down in the comments because this situation is moving fast, and I want to hear where you think this is headed. If this breakdown helped you actually understand what's going on along that coastline instead of just seeing headlines fly by, do me a favor and hit that like button. Share this with someone who's been trying to follow this conflict but keeps getting lost in the noise, and subscribe so you don't miss the next update, because this story is far from finished. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.